Welcome to Factory Forward, the podcast dedicated to advancing manufacturing and unlocking the full potential of smart factories. In today's episode, we're honored to host Kevin Wood, Cisco's Chief Industrial IoT Architect and a global leader in industrial connectivity and digital transformation. With over 2 decades of experience, from designing robust infrastructure for automotive giants like Volvo to shaping Cisco's industrial network strategy, Kevin brings a unique blend of technical depth and business insight. He's helped bridge the divide between IT and OT, and today, he shares actionable advice on building secure, scalable, and future-ready IoT systems. In this episode, Kevin dives into what makes or breaks large-scale IoT deployments, the real ROI of smart factory initiatives, and how Industry 5.0 is redefining the role of humans in manufacturing. Whether you're a mid-career engineer or a manufacturing executive, this conversation is packed with practical takeaways for driving innovation at the intersection of technology and the shop floor. Now, meet your host, Zishan Zia.
Hi, everyone. On today's Factory Forward podcast, I'm joined by Kevin Wood, Cisco's Chief Industrial IoT Architect. With 2 decades of experience, from designing Volvo's infrastructure to steering Cisco's industrial network strategy, Kevin turns complex shop floor connectivity into real business results. Get ready for practical insights on building secure, scalable industrial IoT that keeps factories future-proof. Thanks for joining, Kevin.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Zishan. Happy to be here.
Yeah, appreciate it, Kevin. I follow you on LinkedIn. I see a lot of your posts, learn a lot from your content, and really eager to jump straight into questions and learning from you. So, Kevin, let me start with what key decisions or moments helped shape your strategy or helped shape your journey from engineering and architecture roles to becoming Cisco's chief industrial IoT architect globally?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it is really a journey. I'm thinking most of us start out in some engineering capacity, and really what I found was I was solution driven. I was fixing problems, but it really became apparent to me that I was doing that in a repetitive fashion. So I needed to think larger. So it was really more of a systems thinking mindset instead of a point solution. So starting to think about things different. That led me to really start thinking about technology and embracing the evolution of technology and really becoming a lifelong student of technology. And then the other thing that we were doing is we were designing stuff in an IT vacuum, right? And we weren't taking into consideration the business. And that was a problem. And that built the proverbial silo between us because we were building what we thought the business needed, and then they were always frustrated with an IT perspective. So really getting close to the business, understanding their world, speaking their language, wearing their jersey, being part of their team, and understanding how to do that was a really, really big point of that. And the other thing was learning how to communicate with the executive suite, because we're translating often pretty technical topics into executive speak. So how do you condense and simplify the message because their time is extremely valuable. They're running in, a million miles an hour. So I want to be able to condense that. And then inevitably you want to become an architecture champion. And I started looking at why do architecture programs fail? Because there's a lot of EA programs out there that just don't make it. So it led me down to a path, and I worked on my master's in enterprise architecture for that particular reason. And what I found is when I could dig into the business, I started solving for a problem. And before, it was amazing to me because when I built solutions and you thought you knew the problem, when you dug into the business, you saw the real problem. So that was really the turning point for me. And quite honestly, seeing the business transform, seeing the adoption at a scale I hadn't seen before was really the driving and the motivation factor for me to actually behave differently, if you will.
That's really insightful. Along the same thread, Kevin, how has your background, and you sort of already touched upon this, but how has this background in enterprise and network architecture shaped your leadership style and more strategic decision making as a global IIoT leader?
Yeah, So you really become a strategic thinker, and you have to make that evolution instead of tactical thinking and problem solving. You really have to go into the strategy. I become a security first, network aware decision maker as an engineer, and I grew in that capacity. So my favorite question, and it always frustrates some, is why? Why are you asking me to do X, or why is the business saying they need this? And it really starts providing some insight into why you're actually trying to do something. Um, and understanding where these architectural programs fail and why. And I, if you read a lot of architectural documents, you'll hear the ivory tower syndrome. And that's where they believe IT makes a bunch of decisions in a vacuum and the business can't absorb. So understanding that, and it was kind of an eye opener to me because I sat in that tower at one point in my career, right? And how do you get out and get on the plant floor or the shop floor per se? And then being very cross-functional, being able to lead with the business, be able to lead with IT, be able to bridge between, and then collaborate. The biggest problem between IT and OT when we start bringing them together is um, they just assume each other knows what each other's roles are and models, and we slam them together, and then there's friction and chaos that ensues. So really trying to sit down and really communicate and collaborate and figure out how to do that. That really, really kind of changed the way that I led, if you will.
I love that. I'd love to get into into your insights about how actually these deployments work, technology and solutions. But before that, a lot of our audience is really middle middle managers, right? Middle managers or middle career engineers and architects, and eager to curious to hear what advice you would give to these engineers or architects who are looking to move into leadership roles within industrial technology or IIoT specifically.
Yeah, I think, as I said before, we need to shift from solutions to be a strategic thinker.
Yeah.
And the whole notion that this IT is the cost center, IT is the barrier, security is the battlefield, we're all going to line up and fight, that has to go away. Um, so I'm a big proponent when we start talking about there's people talk about convergence of IT and OT. We like to say it's collaboration of IT and OT because convergence basically says that somebody gets absorbed or loses, right? And in this case, it doesn't. It has to be in a partnership. So we like to call it collaboration. But as we do that, we have to, and I know Cisco and the bridge, the logo, but we have to be the bridge between IT and OT. We're sitting in the middle and brokering conversations, and sometimes they're not going to be pleasant because they don't understand each other's charter and what they're trying to accomplish. Um, and it's from an engineering perspective and getting that next level as an architect, we can't just be technical anymore. We have to be able to translate and articulate and understand business at least to a certain point, understand what their challenges are, and don't wait for this to happen. Because if we wait for this to happen, it never will. So we have to assume that leader role. And I think it's important for somebody going into this that you don't have to have a bunch of people under you to be considered a leader.
Right.
You become a leader by leading. And that could be a technical leader, thought innovation, that type of leadership. And how do I think about putting scale, resilience? How do I innovate? And the value of that innovation to the business, it can't be understated. And then I guess the final couple things is being curious, always ask questions, always want to dig. And the other thing is to be paranoid because you are one click away from being breached, right? So I'll probably talk about security in several of the questions that you may have, but security and visibility are going to be huge proponents of things going in that I want everybody to keep an eye out for.
That's fantastic. I'm sure it's going to help a lot of a lot of those junior or middle career folks that are listening to this. Switching gears a little bit, Kevin. What are the biggest challenges in making industrial IoT adoption really stick beyond just pilots and POCs?
Yeah, that's a good question. And there's lots of tricky things here when we start looking at that. And I think some of it is the lack of ownership.
Mm.
So they go in with a POC. It's, part of this collaboration thing where IT and OT is not coming together. There's not a joint ownership or a joint view of the need. Um, Often we put in POCs, they're one-offs. There may we do some sort of a canned integration, but there's not a plan to scale it, right? So what if this is successful? Then what do we do? And a lot of times it'll stall because there's no way, no planned out way to deploy. Everybody thinks it's too complex. We're going to stop. And it's also the point that how do you know it's successful? If you don't have a successful criteria set out, did you meet it? And I see so many POCs that we want to try this new thing and we get it in there, and they're like, I don't know if it worked. What was my goal? So establishing an ROI or a value metric that we want to get, and then I'm going to go back to security and risk for a minute. I can't innovate if I don't have an environment that I can trust that is secure, because I'm going to put new software, I'm going to put new devices on the network. And inherently, if the organization doesn't see it secure, guess what? They're going to block it, and we're not going to be able to innovate. So those are some of the big challenges, but I think it goes back to that lack of awareness and lack of ownership and really being aware of what success looks like.
Uh, Absolutely. In fact, I would like to double click on that piece where you talked about ROI, being able to define what success looks like, being able to measure it. How do you advise companies to measure the ROI of their, IIoT initiatives beyond just operational efficiency?
Yeah, the operational efficiency is what everybody's going to gravitate to, right?
Yeah.
Uptime, OEE, those type of metrics that are just, table stakes, if you will, of this type of conversation. But how do you look at measuring agility? So how do you look at measuring innovation? So how important is it for me to be able to innovate and or go to market sooner? So if I'm going to release a new product and I can cut weeks off of its release into manufacturing, what's the value of that? There is a number associated with that, and it's probably bigger, and they're often harder to quantify. I think why people go to the operational numbers is because they're easy to get your hands on, right? I can measure how many hours my plant's been up. I can measure how many widgets that I'm putting out. But when I think about speed to market and innovation, how do I measure that? The other thing that I don't know that we do is the industry should continuously monitor the ROI of those initiatives. And I've seen it so many times where it's a point in time. Oh, okay, I've generated this ROI, I'm done. But that's something that should be a living model. And it should be agreed upon so we can know. Because at some point, as your business requirements change, maybe that ROI changes. Maybe it gets worse, maybe it gets better, maybe I have to do something different. But find the way to look at agility and innovation and what's that soft value to the business, because it is a huge, huge number.
100%. How does again slightly different direction? What misconception do a lot of these companies where you go in and or you're leading these kinds of changes in, or your teams are leading changes in, what kind of misconceptions do they have about implementing real-time industrial data architectures?
So in that aspect, I would say that a lot of organizations don't put value on data. They don't rank the data. They see all data as emergency and it's necessary. So therefore, we dump all of this at something. And we risk communication, we risk models, we risk decision making, because there's an old saying that if everything is an emergency, nothing is an emergency, right? So we need to be able to classify what is truly needed for real time, because there's some of this data that's batch data or trending data that I may not need for, it could be minutes, it could be hours before I need to log that. But at the same time, when I'm thinking about things like computer vision and other things, I need it now, because the speed of my assembly lines are moving. I'm taking a lot of high definition images. I need to get it to a server to be compute and to look at the analytics. I don't have time. So you need to classify that. The other thing I think the misconception is how important the network is. So when I think of this model and I think of manufacturing, I think of the machines and the robots as the arms, the tissue, the bones. And I think of AI and my analytics as the brain, but there's a piece in the middle. If I don't have a nervous system, I can't move, right? So thinking about how important the network is, how do I scale it? How do I prioritize traffic? When I'm driving, especially large chunks of video across the network, for example, I've got sensitive control traffic that needs to be protected because I'll have PLC problems. I've got AGVs that sensitive problems, so I have to be able to think about that. The other thing I think of people look at is I'll worry about security later, right? And cybersecurity should be their first thought. When I put this in, what is its risk? What is its exposure? What's it going to do? And it's not something that you have is an afterthought that you deal with later. I think the other thing is they think these environments are totally static. And once I build them, once I drop them in, I'm good. But as your business has changed, that architecture needs to be elastic because we may scale up from a bandwidth consumption need and a performance. We may scale down, or we may have to do that dynamically based upon the business conditions. So I think those are the big things that I would say that I see as misconceptions out there on real-time data.
No, this is really helpful. I appreciate you bringing in the mention of computer vision and those kinds of high bandwidth AGVs for that matter, high bandwidth applications where network bandwidth and those kinds of things are really important. But a lot of guests that I have, they're typically talking more at the application layer of AI and IoT and those kinds of things. And this is really insightful what you're talking about, more at the infrastructure level of IoT, right? How do you
Yeah.
actually enable those kinds of applications once you have the right infrastructure in place, and then it's always a possibility to have better and better applications, things at the application layer.
And then, like I said before, the network, you may have large data streams, and I may have to stop that data stream to interject high or latency sensitive traffic, let it go through before I restart the high volume stream. So there's a lot of different network functions that changes when we start doing AI and really bringing in the smart factory into this. It's a whole different world.
Yeah, so absolutely, it's incredibly exciting. Kevin, you've spoken about it. You kind of touched upon this right now as well. How does industrial network segmentation improve both the performance and security of these, in these complex operations?
My favorite topic.
Yeah.
So, absolutely. So security is going to take a look at that attack surface, and we're going to reduce it. We're going to reduce the risk of attacks. We're going to be able to contain and restrain. The problem with a lot of networks out there that I see that are big and flat, once I'm in, I can go anywhere I need to. So the notion of, I don't think you can have too much segmentation is how do you chop this thing into smaller bits to be able to protect it. In order to do that, though, I have to know what's on the network. And we have a saying that you can't protect what you can't see. So our first most important thing is about visibility. So identify clearly what's on the shop floor, and then we start looking at the infrastructure to do dynamic segmentation. So as things change, we don't want to depend on the way we used to segment many years ago, which is by spreadsheet, right? Point in time. So we want to be able to have the network be dynamic. It also reduces congestion. So the notion of making our broadcast domain smaller, we're going to be able to manage and control bandwidth better. And quite honestly, if we take a model that defines segmentation, like Purdue, for example, very common, and IEC 62443, which is zones and conduits, if we build that model when we start collaboration, everybody knows where they're playing, right? Everybody knows what zone they live in, and everybody knows what security policy is applied to that conduit. So in my opinion, it also helps in that collaboration perspective between IT and OT.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Kevin, kind of, again, shifting gears, everybody's talking about AI, generative AI is gaining momentum. A lot of real use cases have been exposed as well, at least in the consumer space. If everybody uses ChatGPT, what applications do you see emerging in smart factories in the next 3 to 5 years?
I mean, I see a lot of use cases right now that people are really trying to get their hands around. Things like how do I build SOPs or operating procedures and policies and playbooks? So how do I leverage data from my business and have AI help generate those? Because we all know if we generate those manually, they're extremely time consuming to do. The other thing I think is pretty big is root cause analysis. Because we've got these big pools of data about our shop floor. And when something goes wrong, it could take weeks for us to sit through and figure out what exactly happened because we may cross multiple pools of data. AI can do that in minutes, maybe even seconds, right? Because we plug in all our data sources and we can crank out some sort of root cause analysis. We can make some decisions, hopefully fix it so it doesn't happen again. We can also adapt our manufacturing process based on, or let me say, our production process based on manufacturing constraints. So if there's problems in the manufacturing or there's hiccups or the speed of which I'm going through, I can adjust my models dynamically with that data. Same with planning and scheduling. So if my manufacturing speeds start changing, then my scheduling if I'm doing just-in-time shipping or receiving for a product, then that's impacting, right? The amount of goods I'm putting out the door is impacting. But I think the thing that most everybody is really excited about is taking that old HMI process and having a dashboard and interface and turning it into a conversational thing. So now I'm talking to my factory. I'm asking questions. I'm getting data and really starting to speed up the rate at which because I don't have to look for things. We just ask it, right? So that's what really people are really looking forward to that when they start looking at how do I control and interact. And then I think personalizing digital twin. Digital twins is a big thing right now, and it's not going anywhere. Everybody wants to have that personalization. And as we start getting into the mindset of industry 4 and 5 and the shift between the two, we're talking about a move from a no human to a human centralization type policy. So I think that's where we're going to see generative AI take off in the next few years.
That's amazing. I hadn't heard about some of these things. Some of these things I had heard about, but the sheer number of examples you gave, I think that's really rich, and I'm sure folks who are listening will dive deeper and try to try to think about a lot of these use cases. Uh, Kevin, as we move towards, let's call it Industry 5.0, what shifts do you see in how technology and humans will interact on the shop floor?
Yeah, so I define Industry 5 as Industry 4.5.
Right.
Because in Industry 4, we started bringing in AI, machine learning, and really 4 was about secure connectivity. Is how do I get everything secured from Industry 3, which is my digital, now to get everything on the wire so I can get access to all the data to do AI and ML. But Industry 4 took the human out and said, we got to take the human out of the process because they're the problem, right? When we go to Industry 5, we put the human right back in the middle. So what that means is we're switching from that fully automated plant to a point where we're augmenting the human. So we're putting technology, i.e., you think about cobots or humanoids in Industry 5, side by side. And where in a plant floor Industry 4, we had a robotic arm that was fenced around like an auto manufacturing place. Now, all this communication, reliability, security is really, really important because I've got this interaction between my humanoid and my human has got to take place. And it's very adaptive because the notion is we're taking, as we talked about with HMI, we're taking the interface and we're turning it into a conversation. So think about standing on an assembly line with a humanoid and you're talking back and forth and delivering instructions. And it takes you away from the whole notion of a fixed set of instructions that this thing is doing, because now I have to go to a dynamic environment where my work instructions as the humanoid may change as the environment changes. So it's not about the human being the fail point. I think it's taking the human to be kind of an innovator, but we're putting tools in the human's hands so we can make better, faster, more intuitive decisions. So I think it almost like we hit a point with 4, we overcorrected, and now 5 is kind of a bit of a reset where we're kind of balancing it out a little bit.
That's fascinating. Really, really new points. I've not heard them before. This is this formulation of, we're in some ways getting back to where we started while having more technology and fancier things, humanoids and generative AI and so on. Kevin, this is a question that I asked every single one of my guests, and I think you've touched upon that a little bit, or actually a fair bit already, but I'll still put it in these exact words. What is the one thing that manufacturers don't do enough of to be factory forward in 2025?
Yeah, so as we're on the cusp of going from 4 to 5, I think it's really enablement, education. So how do we enable our workforce to use the tool sets? What tool sets do we allow them to use? Do we encourage that use? And how do we foster collaboration across the board? How do we get that whole notion of collaboration in the culture? Because if not, the people factor or the culture factor will squash innovation every time, right? And we also need to be able to deliver, measure outcomes, and we need to empower the workforce to understand what those outcomes are and help us be able to monitor and provide, reliable KPIs and monitor those. And then I think we have to teach security, because first and foremost, the first line of defense for security is the human firewall, because we have the ability to click on things, do things that will expose it. The machines, the software stacks will do exactly what we tell them to do. But if we don't empower, enable, and collaborate and educate the workforce, I think that's where we really get into trouble. So it's about the human-centric side of this whole journey into the next wave of manufacturing.
That is amazing. Really appreciate it. Kevin, it was absolutely fantastic having you here. Even though we've only been talking for maybe 30 minutes, I feel like I've learned more than what I would by spending a day at a leading IIoT conference or so. And I'm sure that our audience is going to feel the same way. Thank you so much for joining. I hope we can have you again in one of our future seasons. But I really appreciate your time.
Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. And if, as always, if people want to follow and keep up with me, then the LinkedIn links are out there, and maybe that's something that you can share as well.
Absolutely. We'll put it right under the video link that we post.
Awesome.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Factory Forward. If you found value in today's discussion, don't forget to follow us on Spotify to stay updated with future episodes, and share it with your network to keep the conversation going. Join us on social media using #FactoryForward and let us know your thoughts. We appreciate you being part of a community that's always striving to improve, innovate, and move forward. Until next time, keep pushing boundaries and embracing new ideas. See you in the next episode of Factory Forward.